Yeah, so like you said, my name is Rob Chinery. I'm the developer of WorkLab. It's a game that's centered around the Portal mechanic for VR. It will be on Quest as well as Steam VR. You could definitely compare it to Portal in terms of being centered around the Portal mechanic as the core, sort of gameplay draw. But it's also different in that it definitely has a stronger emphasis on action and combat as well. There are puzzles in there, but it's more of a balance between action, shooting, combat, and puzzle gameplay as well. That all of which is still based around that Portal mechanic.
Sure. How long? When did you start developing it?
It's been about a year and a half.
Oh, right. Okay. And have you found that the original point of it has changed as you've gone on? Or you found things that worked for things that didn't? What was the original?
Yeah, no, I mean the goal and the vision for the game has really remained the same. Certain aspects have been expanded as I've gone through and sort of figured out different methods for achieving different types of interactions with portals on a technical level. So the scope of the game is definitely expanded, both in terms of the features and in terms of the amount of content that will be in the final game.
So, I mean, you've made no bones of the fact that it's clearly inspired by Portal and has that mechanic. What would you say? And you said that there's a little bit more. I watched the video that you shared to Twitter, and it looks really, really slick. But how does the combat work in there? That's something that's very much not in the original sort of Portal idea.
Yeah, exactly. So in Portal, there's a very limited combat. I mean, there's the turrets, the stationary turrets,
Yeah.
and you can kind of have them shoot at each other. So one of the biggest differences is that WorkLab has actual AI enemies, that humanoid enemies that walk around and that will track you, will fire at you, and that you can pick up a gun and fire back at them. I think you probably saw in the video one example of how that can work with the portal mechanic is, if say you're entering a space with multiple enemies, you're outnumbered, they could be coming at you from different directions. You can use the portal abilities to, sort of get around them, kind of get the drop on them, get in behind them. You can, from one position, shoot a portal somewhere that gives you additional vantage point on one that's behind cover, so that you can shoot them while you're sort of behind cover as well, and then you can jump through that. You could use it to evade enemies. There's a lot of tactical possibilities in terms of being able to use the portals, which I think some other games have touched on as well. There's Splitgate. I think there may be some other titles as well that have sort of expanded upon the portal mechanic, but in a more action-oriented way.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because Portal is, I mean, the idea of using portals is so simple. You wonder why nobody had really explored it like that in the first place. But it's one of those things which I think it's surprisingly not been imitated very much, considering that it's the sort of idea that everybody sees it and goes, "Oh wow, yeah, okay," and they get it immediately. And people who've never played Portal are capable of like seeing a Portal meme and going, "Oh right, in one door out another." It's not actually been hugely adopted or referenced in other games. In itself, something that like you've got a love for and wanted to bring to VR, or is it simply that you saw a kind of, why hasn't anyone really done that in VR?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a very compelling game mechanic, and I'm as surprised as you are that I think that it hasn't been, taken advantage of more. I think that there are a lot more, possibilities for it that haven't been explored, both in a flat, way as well as in VR. I think in VR there's a lot of technical hurdles that needed to be overcome in order to achieve it. So I think it makes sense to me why it hasn't been done in VR. Especially because you don't get as much investment from the major studios and
right, sure, yeah.
development for VR. So something that's, and I think that Valve had actually touched on that even in an interview at one point about why there's no, official
Sure.
VR. But so from a VR perspective, it's difficult to achieve, and especially to do it in a seamless way. There's mods, there's some like I think in App Lab titles and stuff that have kind of sort of captured the mechanic, but in a way that certainly isn't seamless. And look, you could quickly prototype something where you shoot portals that show a low resolution preview that sort of can capture the gameplay of it. But if you're without being able to walk up to a portal, to see in stereoscopic 3D through it, to have it look like an extension of the world, and then to be able to smoothly walk through that, that's what really sells the mechanic, and I think that's what really makes it work as as something that you can build a whole game around. So and that was difficult to achieve. That's definitely what the first 6 months or more of development was focused on, was just figuring out ways to overcome some of those technical hurdles and to create a system that runs on Quest, because it was extremely important to me that it be able to run on the standalone hardware in order to reach the widest audience possible. But so to be able to run on those standalone systems, and also maintain the level of quality and seamless interaction that people expect from Portal and from other titles that have done it properly. So I think it started. It started for me as it's certainly a gameplay mechanic that I've always loved, whether it be Portal or Splitgate. But for me, it started as sort of a challenge of can I achieve this in VR on Quest?
How far into the process were you before you realised why no one's really done it before?
Well, like I said, the scope of the game and the features have expanded since I started development. So initially, there were more limitations. The implementation definitely had restrictions to it, and then I would continue to push that further and further, because I'd say, well, this works, but people are going to be disappointed that it doesn't work exactly like it did in Portal. Or, people are going to say, well, this is cool, but I can't do this, which is what I really wanted to do with Portals in VR. So, that definitely, that was sort of the challenge and motivation for me to continue to say, all right, well, I want players to be able to do everything that they'd expect to be able to do with Portals in this game. So, that certainly was a challenge to be able to ensure that all of those things work and work in a way that's not janky, and that, that doesn't seem like it's compromised.
That's really interesting. The thing that surprised me when I watched the video is that I think I've seen the same interview with the Valve guys that you referenced, and they were saying that one of the things about Portal is there are so many puzzles which are based on kind of forward movement and like hurtling yourself through the air. And one of the challenges of VR is making sure that it just doesn't make people chuck up straight away. Now, I'm the sort of person, I've always had pretty good VR legs, and I'm always sort of disappointed when I feel like there's a path less traveled when it comes to VR games. I was really surprised in the Warp Club video just how much kind of that hurling yourself through the portal kind of gameplay there is in there, and how solid that seems to be. Was that something that was that one of the biggest challenges for you?
Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge. Not from a performance perspective, which had a lot of challenges. But that particularly in a portal, say you put one portal on the floor, you put one on the wall, you jump through. In a flat portal game, it has to flip you around back to the proper orientation. That's something that wouldn't work in VR. I think no matter how good your VR legs, having yourself be flipped around, artificially in VR, I just don't think would be a good experience for anyone. So, I had to come up with a different method of handling that. And the options were, restrict players' ability to put portals on surfaces at different angles like that, which was certainly something that I considered. But again, that goes back to one of those things where players might say, well, this is something that I expect to be able to do, and I want to be able to do. So instead, I came up with a different solution for it. It definitely it works differently than what people would expect. And it definitely eliminates some of the possibilities in Portal with some of those forward momentum based puzzles. Not all of them, but some. But it also opens up new possibilities in that the way that it works is it's a little bit difficult to explain. It's something that once you experience it, it kind of clicks. But if you put a portal on the floor and you put one on the wall, and you walk through the one on the wall, the map will actually, the orientation of the map will change around you. So the player's center of gravity always stays the same, but you'll then come out, say, walking on the ceiling or a wall instead of the floor. And then, when you go back through, you'll go back to the original orientation. So, and it wasn't a perfect solution. It's not quite as simple as in Portal when it just flips you back around. But it opens up additional puzzle possibilities in that, there's certain puzzles that require you to figure out how you can orient yourself in order to reach a certain part of the map in order to progress through the level. So, once I realized that it opened up additional possibilities for that in terms of gameplay and challenges, I thought, this is actually, I think, a solution that will work fairly well.
That sounds fantastic. What's been your involvement with VR development before? Have you done many games in VR, or just it's very much like a
yeah, I haven't done many games. I've done a few sort of like experimental projects, and then I did a multiplayer shooter project that's on App Lab that's had some modest success. It's a free sort of just a hobby project. So that's had some modest success, and I've been able to sort of take some of the following community that I built there and take advantage of that to help promote this new game. So, but I have been working in VR on various levels for about probably 5 or 6 years now.
Oh, right. Okay. What was your into VR? How did you get involved with it?
The first time that I tried VR was an HTC Vive, probably. I don't remember when that came out now, but probably about a year or so after that came out. I think I tried it at an event or something like that. And prior to that, I mean, yeah, I'd heard about VR, but I wasn't really that interested. And then once trying it out, it was like, wow, this is definitely something unique that that has a lot of potential. So then I went out and purchased one, and then from there, I played. I didn't develop for it, and then once they started to come out with the standalone devices, like even the Gear VR and even the Oculus Go, I started to develop sort of small demo projects on them, and then with the Quest, that really just opened up the possibilities in terms of developing content that can reach a wide audience.
I'm really curious about in terms of the game's scope. I mean, in terms like just basic things like single player campaign. I remember you mentioned something maybe about adding multiplayer later, and I'm wondering about like what kind of a campaign you've got in mind. Story-based campaign? Do you have any idea like how big the game's, like how many levels you're planning to put in there? Just the general scale of the game and different like gameplay possibilities.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that's changed over the course of development. Originally, it was going to be about 10 levels. Now, based on the response, I've upped it to probably somewhere in the 20 to 25 range of levels. And there's also a sandbox mode. And they're sort of interconnected in that certain things that you do as you progress through the campaign levels will unlock additional content for the sandbox mode. The campaign, it doesn't exactly have a story, but there are little Easter eggs and things like that that sort of you could kind of put together as a story in some sense, but it's not a traditional story with cutscenes and dialogue and that kind of thing. I really wanted to focus more on the gameplay, and I didn't want a story to really get in the way of certain gameplay possibilities too much, particularly with different themed levels and different. Like I said, I really wanted to just keep it wide open in terms of the gameplay possibilities, since the mechanic is really the
Excuse me. That's probably very wise as well, because one of the things that Portal is best known for is that kind of is the narrative, and the humor is a very specific theme to it. And I think if you even if you try to, you either kind of ape that or deliberately don't do that. But either way, it's something that you kind of having to avoid.
That's a great point. That was actually a big factor as well in the decision to kind of forgo a real story. I'm never going to be able to compete with the writers that Valve has, and that it would only be compared to what Valve has already put out in terms of story, in terms of the witty content. There's just no competing with that. So it's better to just kind of avoid it altogether, in my opinion.
That's very, very wise. Yeah.
Okay. Do you imagine, can you see any possibilities down the line where you might add a feature where people would be able to build their own levels, and then, community shared levels and something like that?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that a lot of people have requested in response to the trailers and the footage I put out so far. It's definitely something that I'd like to work on implementing. There's some technical hurdles involved in that. It's building levels for this game. It's definitely more difficult than a traditional modding experience for most games, or anything like that. There's a lot more manual work that has to go into optimizing it, and there's some additional sort of technical quirks and stuff that have to be considered when building levels. So it'll definitely be a challenge, and it won't be in there at launch, but I can definitely see the potential for that. So post launch, it's definitely something that I would like to explore.
Okay, and the multiplayer thing, I don't know if we add.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to touch on that. That's multiplayer is definitely possible. I would say there's a lot less hurdles involved in implementing multiplayer than in the custom maps.
Okay.
I think there's just so many cool possibilities for multiplayer that it would be a shame.
You're thinking co-op or competitive?
Possibly both. I definitely have some cool ideas for how multiplayer could work. I know in the past, working with multiplayer in VR, one of the challenges is building enough of a user base, a player base that people can access matches quickly and easily. And it's sort of the chicken or the egg type of thing, where you have people that do come on and try your game, and they're like, I couldn't find a match in 5 minutes, 1 star. And then obviously it becomes difficult to build a player base. So that's why I definitely wanted to focus on the single player aspect of this first. And I think that could help to build a player base out. And then when it's time to hopefully implement multiplayer, there's already an existing player base that can, make sure that there's constant matches available. So, but I definitely would like to add multiplayer, because I just think it would be a shame to, not take advantage of some of the possibilities.
Okay. I'm wondering, when it comes to the level design, do you see it as possible that somebody could finish the levels without needing to do combat or something like that? Or can you finish a level by just solving puzzles, or is it a combination of both always? Or you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean,
so that's
sort of like
the
necessity of solving puzzles versus the combat. Can I get through a level just with combat? Can I get through a level just with solving puzzles? Or is it always like a synergy of both of them, where you have to be good at both somehow?
That's a great question. So I guess to start, some levels will have more of a combat focus. Some will have more of a puzzle focus. But one of the things that I've always really appreciated in games is the ability to choose how you approach a level or a challenge. So that's always something that I've found compelling in a game, when you can choose. All right, well, there's different options here. You can sort of figure out your own way. There's not just one way to get to the end. So, and this is not necessarily the case for every level and every, part of each level, but for a lot of them, I try to build them out so that you can approach it different ways. And the portal mechanic really helps with that because you can potentially find unique ways to sort of maybe avoid a combat scenario altogether, or get past a puzzle without solving it the traditional way. And I think that kind of then plays into the puzzle aspect of the game, and that there are these sort of exploits that you could use, some of which are sort of intended that way, and some of which I'm sure that players will discover that I didn't know about. But I think that is definitely a cool thing to be able to figure out different ways. Well, I could skip past this whole part of the level, this whole combat section, let's say, by putting a portal back towards the beginning and then putting one past it, and just walk right through and skip that. So there's definitely things like that, and then there's also different sort of Easter eggs and things like that that could help players to approach challenges in different ways.
That's fantastic. It's definitely a joy of the original of the Portal games. There are you can see other people solve something in completely different ways. It's been amazing playing it with my 8-year-old son, because he just thinks completely differently to me, and it's hard not to feel completely outclassed. So it's really it's really encouraging to know that you're baking that in, and you're happy to encourage that, because I'd imagine, as you said, some of the technical limitations of doing things and the difficulties presented in simply having that mechanic and in the quest must make that quite a head scratcher. So I'm just really looking for. I had absolutely no idea that this game existed before Omar said that I'd seen it on Twitter, and it's just I personally find it looks really, really exciting, and I have to admire your balls as well, given the hole that we ripped Bone Lab, which is very much, it seems to me to be very, very much more of a pastiche of Valve than this. I was quite surprised when I saw the video just how much of its own beast it seems to be, considering you're using the mechanic of firing one portal and firing another one and moving through them. It really does seem to have like a completely different sort of beat to the gameplay. By the time I finished the video footage that you released, finished watching that, I was like, I felt like I had a pretty good handle on how the game would play, and it wasn't the kind of pure pastiche that I thought it could be, So yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing it. How have you got to go, do you think, before release? Do you have a date for release?
Well, I'm planning for spring of next year. So that's if everything goes as planned, hopefully. I'm currently, I would say, on track to meet that. I can't rule out delays, but it should be next year. I mean, if it's not spring, it shouldn't be much past that. But ideally, it will be spring. And then just to touch on what you had said before that, it was definitely important to me as well to make sure that this didn't seem like it was just a Portal ripoff in VR, because I think the mechanic has more potential than that, where it doesn't necessarily have to be confined to and defined by one game, even if it or two games, but even if they are really great games. But I wanted to come up with different ways of differentiating and different ways of using the mechanic that maybe that they hadn't taken advantage of in Portal. So there's some other differences as well, aside from the things I already talked about. For one thing, the portals are not color coded, as you saw,
yes,
and you can't. So you can't choose, say, swap between which portal you control. You shoot one, you shoot the other one, and I did that for a number of reasons. One being simplicity, for users that new users to VR, they often have trouble finding the buttons and stuff like that. So I thought, all right, let me limit how many buttons you need to use, how many times you need to click buttons. And then it adds another element to the puzzles and the challenge, in that you sort of then need to remember, all right, I shot this portal here, this one there. So like when you're switching between them, you can't just quickly click a button and control each one. You have to sort of remember which one's which and control them, just by firing them. So, and then even in terms of the style, the lack of color, definitely changes the style a bit. I definitely wanted it to give it its own identity, that was very separate from that. So,
In terms of, sorry, go on.
No, after you.
Okay. No, I was going to ask in terms of your roadmap for release, what, like, out of all the features that we've discussed, you could possibly add into it, the sandbox mode, the build your own levels, mode sort of thing, the multiplayer, all that sort of stuff. So what are you thinking in terms of what are you aiming to include in the release, and what would you say, should come afterwards?
So the release, the release will have the 20 or so plus campaign levels, and a significant amount of sandbox content. So because that was another thing, I thought in VR or not, but particularly in VR, it would be really neat to be able to just play with portals and physics, and just kind of test them and push them to their limits. So the sandbox, actually, I sort of came up with that first, and then I thought, well, let me expand on this with actual like linear levels as well. But the sandbox is definitely an important part of it. It adds to the replayability, and then it complements the campaign levels, because, like I said, they're sort of interconnected, in where certain things that you do in the campaign levels will improve your experience in the sandbox and give you access to additional content. So the game will launch with those two modes, the sandbox and the campaign levels.
Okay.
Have you got any plans after this game? Is there anything that you'd like to do?
No, I mean, for now, just really focusing on making sure that this is the best game that it can be. I think expectations are high. I haven't promoted it too widely yet, but I'm slowly starting to ramp up the promotion to the public. I think I only first publicly posted anything about it about 2 months ago or so, and now I'm just slowly starting to build more of a following as more of the game is complete and ready to show off. But so I think expectations are going to be high. So I'm very much focused on making sure that those are met for now. And then like I said, at least for a little bit afterwards, there's definitely some post-launch content that I think could be really interesting that I would want to focus on.
It does sound really, really exciting. It looks fantastic.
It does.
Thank you.
I was going to ask, is your development focused on Quest, and then you enhance whenever possible for PC VR, or are you developing mainly on PC VR and then sort of down scaling a little bit to get it on Quest? I mean, what's the main development platform? Yeah. Good
question. So it's developed for Quest first. I think particularly, as a solo developer, it just makes sense that way, especially with a game that it was difficult to make work on Quest. I think, and I think we've seen it even with larger studios where they develop for Quest first a lot of times, because it's just it's difficult to get things to run at an acceptable level on Quest. And then the player base is just so much larger that it just makes sense to focus on the platform that's going to reach the largest number of players. I know that PC VR players are often disappointed then, and that they feel like they're getting sort of a scaled down experience on PC. There's definitely improvements on the PC version. There'll be post processing. There'll be some higher quality assets, things like that. But I think you do have to find a balance. I don't think a game that's just made strictly for PC VR is obviously going to be higher quality in terms of all that, because otherwise it's almost like you'd be developing two separate games from scratch. But the Quest, it's definitely built for the Quest first. That's the idea is it needs to run smoothly on that, and that's part of satisfying those expectations, is making sure that that it looks good enough, which I think so far I think I've done a pretty good job of keeping the visuals at an acceptable level, and also making sure that it runs well, especially with a game like this where comfort is already a concern for some people. It needs to run smoothly, otherwise they're just they're going to say it doesn't work.
With that in mind, that you're starting with those technical limitations, is there anything in the game that you've had to scale back a little bit? Anything that you would like to have done that, because of the technical limitations of the Quest, you'd like
Yeah.
to?
So one thing, I don't think it's a major thing, but you've probably seen it in the trailers. The portals, like the recursion of the portals through each one, it only ends at the first one. So when you shoot through portals, in a like flat game, VR game, you'll see endless portals going on. In Work Lab, it's just you see a perfect high quality 3D version of what's through the portal through each portal that you've fired. Past that, they're kind of blocked off white until you pass through the portal, and then it becomes an active portal that you can see through again. It would be nice to have that recursion, obviously, but that's when you run into some serious performance issues in terms of how many times can you do this, particularly on a mobile chipset. And it's something that I don't think really affects the experience too much. I think the important thing is being able to stand in front of that portal and see what's through the portal that's right in front of you, and then to be able to pass through that. I found that it really doesn't affect it too much not seeing those infinite runs of portals. Yeah. So that would be one restriction.
That's pretty good going if that's one of the biggest compromises you've had to make.
Thanks. Yeah, I feel that way. I feel like if that's the only compromise, I think it's definitely an acceptable one.
Okay. I think that all sounds great. Any final questions, Doc?
I was just going to say we're running out of time. I think we've covered the game pretty thoroughly for what we've seen and what can be shown. Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to playing it because it looks genuinely fantastic. What are your favorite VR games? What are the things that kind of inspired you the most? What was your gateway? I'm always interested in finding out what your VR gateway drug was.
Yeah, so Super Hot is definitely something I really enjoyed. I thought that was a really unique game mechanic. The VR, really, it worked really well in VR. It worked on the flat version as well, but I think VR really brought that to life even more so. And that's something that I think that happens with the portal mechanic as well. Because, it works well on a flat screen, but in VR, being able to stand in front of a portal and stare through it and see it in 3D. Once you see it in 3D, it kind of feels like in flat games, like it's a flat TV screen almost. So I think that's something that it definitely VR improves upon. So Super Hot, some of the physics-based games like Blade and Sorcery, the Walking Dead. I definitely enjoy some of those physics-based games. I think a lot of games felt like they need to use the intense physics like that in order to appeal to people going forward. And this is not exactly I didn't want to get into that. There are physics in this game, but just mostly in how they apply to portals. A lot of these genres in VR, there are so many games that have tried to sort of do the same thing in terms of whatever gameplay mechanic, heavy duty physics interactions, stuff like that. So I've definitely gotten inspiration from some of those games, but I'm not really trying to imitate any current VR game. It's sort of its own thing, and like I said, this game it does have physics in it, but sort of lighter, less realistic physics. Obviously, portals are not real, so that's a sort of non-realistic form of physics. But you can kind of push objects and stuff like that, but it's not meant to be realistic. There's no heavy weighted objects, things like that that I think are fun, but can also contribute to some jankiness as well. But again, in this case, really, everything is centered around the portals. So all the other mechanics are really built to take advantage of and to be able to interact with the portals in a compelling way.
Are you developing this entirely on your own, or is there a team behind you?
So yeah, I'm mostly a solo developer. I do work with some freelancers as well that have contributed, some pretty good content. There's also I'm in some talks that I can't really discuss yet with some potential partners as well on it. So there could be some announcements coming with that, but at the moment it's just a solo project. It's really just me. Like I said, some freelancers for some additional assets and content.
Okay. One of the titles that me and Pete have always been very impressed by, especially because it was also solo developer, is God. Okay, I blanked out on its name now. Crashland. What was it called? Crashlands. Crashland.
Crashlands.
Crashlands. Yeah, that was also pretty much a solo developer, and we were super impressed by it. It nailed the gameplay. It really nailed the gameplay. It had lots of different environments and using atmospheric effects to sort of add variety to the environments. And I remember, especially with Pete, because one of the pet peeves that Pete always has with most games is the limited enemy variety. And with Crashlands, he was very impressed by the enemy variety and the enemy design. And that was just, yeah, it was pretty much one solo developer as far as I know.
Yeah, I know of the game. I haven't played it, but I do want to check it out actually. I think there's obviously advantages and disadvantages to being a solo developer, but I think one advantage is it's easier for you to kind of execute your vision and also to take feedback from the audience without having to deal with bureaucracy and all that. So I think it is sometimes easier to build out experiences that address a lot of the issues that people have with other VR titles, especially some of the bigger studio ones that I'm sure they're not as flexible in terms of being able to pivot and change and address certain concerns. Whereas a solo developer, I mean, I definitely take the audience's feedback into account. Even just when people comment on a Reddit post or on Twitter, you'll see a trend of people saying, oh, I'd really like to see this, or maybe I don't like this so much, and it's pretty easy to then take that and actually implement changes that address it.
You're not having to steer the ship for several people. It's just the buck stops with you. So yeah, that's really an interesting point about. Do you find on a developmental level, do you find it kind of relatively easy developing for Quest? Is it a friendly platform from a developer's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as friendly as it can be for VR. VR is definitely more challenging in that you're constantly switching back and forth between the flat PC screen and putting the headset on and exporting a build to then actually play it on the Quest itself. So there's definitely there are challenges to developing for VR, but I think that Meta has done a good job of making Quest as like developer friendly as possible. They've put out a lot of tools recently that have helped to make it easier. And I mean, the greatest thing they've done is give developers access to a large audience, which was obviously a major issue prior to the Quest taking off. So I think it makes it easier to justify investing in and investing time and resources into building experiences like this, knowing that that there's a large audience out there that'll be able to experience it. And then even being able to see the feedback from all these Quest owners that oh, this is something that I really want to play. As soon as this comes out, I'm buying it. That's definitely nice to see. And like I said, you get to reach players that are not as necessarily hardcore gamers with VR ready PCs and stuff like that. I think I mean, I don't know the exact demographics, but I'm sure that there's Quest owners that don't probably own a PC, aren't into PC gaming. Just really liked VR, and I mean, some of them probably don't really game much at all, but they were just so enamored with VR that they purchased a Quest, and now they're playing games like that they wouldn't have played otherwise. So
on the technical side of things, I'm curious. Now that that you've been developing, you've developed a previous title, and now you're working on this. If you were speaking to somebody who is literally just starting to develop a VR title on Quest, what do you think are the major like shortcuts you've learned, or the things that you wish somebody had told you right when you started, the biggest time savers or the biggest things that you feel would have been good to know straight away?
Yeah, well, so for one thing, there's a lot of good frameworks and assets and different things like that out there that can definitely expedite the development process. And I think it makes sense for people to take advantage of them, especially if you're a solo developer just starting out. There's no need to reinvent the wheel and build everything yourself. Um, so yeah, I think that, don't be afraid to take advantage of, content, whether it's open source. I mean, there's a ton of stuff out there that can really help to jumpstart the process. I think another thing and it's definitely something that I've learned a lot about through developing for Quest, and even back to the Oculus Go, is optimization and some of the key areas and key methods for optimizing for Quest for any standalone VR. I think a lot of people, start developing for Quest and they think, for most, I mean, if you're building a game for most other platforms, you can kind of just start throwing things together and it works. For Quest though, you're very limited in the processing power that you have access to. I mean, it's impressive for what it is, but it needs to put out a lot of frames in 3D in a wide view. So I think, reading up and studying the different ways that you can optimize, and some of them are fairly easy once you, figure out how they work and why they're necessary. But I think optimization is key, especially because on AppLab and on some places, you'll see unoptimized games, and it's worse in VR than it is, on a flat screen. Because if you have an unoptimized game that doesn't run well on a flat screen, I mean, it might not be fun, but it's not going to make you sick. Whereas in VR, if you don't know how to optimize, even if you put together like a really solid gameplay experience, you're just going to have people, whether they're getting sick, whether they're like disoriented, and it's just not going to make for a good experience. And a lot of times, you might be able to, maintain the same level of visual fidelity with some behind the scenes tricks. So, I think that it's really important that developers read up on that. Like I said, there's some fairly easy ways, but once you get the hang of them, to optimize in a way that really doesn't detract from the overall visuals. So, I think that's important. And, also, I think it's important to kind of start small initially. I think some developers, first time developers go into it thinking, all right, I'm going to build out, Grand Theft Auto in VR or something like that. And obviously, if it were that easy, it'd be done already. So I think, it makes sense to start with smaller experiences. I mean, you look at some games like Super Hot, I mean, it's a fairly substantial game, but it's kind of simple. The scenes are small. They're pretty, I mean, there's not much to it, but it does, it works out to be a pretty experience.
We always tend to think that nail the gameplay first and then worry about widening the scope, just nail the core gameplay.
Exactly. And I
played games where it gets wide, but if the core gameplay isn't actually satisfying,
exactly. And so that was the idea with this. I mean, you could just have an empty scene with portals, and it would be fun for at least a little bit to play with them. So if you can build a compelling game mechanic, that's definitely the most important thing. Like, make it where if potential players just saw a 5-second clip of you just using that game mechanic with not much scenery, not much around, that they'd be like, oh, wow, this looks like a lot of fun. I would be interested in more of this. So I think, definitely focus more on that compelling gameplay draw than, building out some huge, massive, detailed experience, because that's a challenge on any platform. I mean, if, you kind of aim too high, you find out once you get into things, it's difficult to build out a really, large experience. So I think it definitely, makes sense to start small.
Okay. Subjects of focus, the combat in the game, it's obviously a bit more it's more front and center than it is in Portal, and we've touched on it briefly already. But is it? Have you added it as a flavor? So basically, the character has like a pistol, and that's it. And I presume you're not aiming for kind of Pavlov with portals, but is there a kind of progression to that? Is it just a Is it just
weapon
pick up
variety
a pistol?
means stuff like that?
Yeah, so good question. So, it's certainly not like Pavlov or like any, combat is not like, it's not built around combat. Basically, the way that it works right now is you can find pistols around. I think I'm trying to think of another game that would be a good comparison, but you don't just start out with a pistol that you have all the time with unlimited ammo or anything like that. You'll find a pistol, and that sort of then opens up the combat scenarios for you. So
are we talking in a kind of, there's that name again, super hot way, where they're kind of there and you use them?
Yes, that's a good example.
Right.
Yeah. So and in some cases,
fantastic.
And in some cases, there might not be a weapon, or maybe you won't need it. Maybe you will. The portal gun can also be used, as you saw in the video, as a weapon. So depending on the situation, you can use that as well. So the combat, like I said, it's not built out to where you're going to be like building a whole loadout of different weapons and stuff like that. It's sort of more you can find a weapon, you can use it, but you might not have to use it. But for people that want to kind of go with that approach, it's definitely there, and at least in some parts of the game. But it's sort of, like I said earlier, the idea was to kind of strike a balance between puzzle gameplay and combat, where neither one necessarily has a stronger emphasis than the other.
Great stuff.
Well,
thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you.
Wonderful to speak to you. Very excited.
Yeah, it's been great speaking to you guys as well. And if you have any other questions, or there's any kind of information or materials I could send over, just feel free to let me know.
All right.
Wonderful. Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a great talk. Thanks.
Nice to meet both of you.
Have a great day. All right.
You
too.
Good luck.